Hey everyone, here I am with David Perell, the founder and instructor of the Rite of Passage online course on transforming your writing. David and I started working together, maybe now a year and a half ago, I think, or more, on what it would look like to teach writing, this thing that we think we all know and know how to do in a completely new way, kind of updated for the 21st century. And here we are a year and a half later, a little more than a year since the first cohort. And I wanted to check in with David and just talk through a little bit of what we've learned, what has been surprising, what has been not surprising, and how far we've come in about 13, 14 months of the Rite of Passage journey. So good to have you here, David. And let's start with let's start with you, and then I'll say what surprised me. What's been the biggest surprise in the past year plus?
Yeah, I think that the biggest surprise has been how important it is to design educational experiences and not just teach people how to write. There's a lot of good information out there on how to learn how to write. And fundamentally, what people struggle with isn't knowing what to do. It is fighting through the fear and the stress and the anxiety and often the loneliness of writing. And as we've built Rite of Passage, that has become our focus, thinking through what does it mean to change identity at scale? And with that, what are the emotions that people come to the course with? And then how do we navigate that cocktail of emotions and dance with it instead of trying to fight it? When I first started Rite of Passage, my answer to most problems was be more motivated, work harder. And now my answer to most problems is something like, well, we need to talk through these things. We need a community for these things. Let's give you the structure and a framework for writing. And then that way you can begin to work with your fear rather than trying to repel it. Because whenever we try to repel fear or negative emotions in life, they always end up showing up later in a way that is often more disastrous than the original problem.
Interesting. So Rite of Passage has become it was from the beginning a personal growth experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not what I expected it to be. And I think that you always say what stops you in this course is the same thing that will stop you in life. And I think that our lives work in these concentric circles where the same things begin to block us everywhere. So whether it is writing, whether it's another kind of creativity, whether it's a productivity course, a programming course, whatever it is, our work, our families, often the same things begin to block us. And it reminds me of something that you said a couple weeks ago. Somebody asked, hey, what do you think my biggest weakness is? And you said, well, it's the opposite of your strength. So often our strengths and weaknesses, they're inverse. And with that inverted nature of the two, Rite of Passage gives us a peek into what that looks like. And with our peers, we can begin to navigate them together and ultimately get to a place where we can go from not writing to being consistent and prolific writers who are improving the quality of their output every single week.
I think the thing that surprised me most is I really didn't think that many people wanted to write. It's like maybe because it felt like for me personally, it felt like a unique sort of tortured path that I couldn't imagine others, especially not a lot of others, walking or wanting to walk. I kind of thought it was just my own kind of esoteric weird thing I do. But I think we're undergoing a blogging renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
We're definitely going through a whole nother cycle of excitement around blogging. And now it's called different things, but it's basically writing. I love the term you use, writing online. Like that's really
Mm-hmm.
what it is. You're writing online.
Mm-hmm.
And it's inspiring a lot of people to get into this. I think that writing online is the water I swim in, and so I wasn't able to see that there was interest in it, that people didn't know how to do it, that they wanted to learn. And so I think when you first approached me, I was like, just writing? Don't you need like something else, like writing and something else? But I feel like you've really captured people's imagination and sparked, I think, a lot of belief. I notice a lot of belief and kind of you've sort of invented new language around the possibility that writing now and in the future can be different than it was in the past, right? Like the common refrain online is always, oh, well, that's just, you've reinvented X. Oh, congratulations, we were doing that 10 or 20 years ago, but it's never, and that's true. And yet it's also reinvented in a completely new way. So I think that's been a big thing. And I think we were talking earlier, I think the thing I've learned from you, it's hard to really articulate because we work so closely that it's like hard to really distinguish, it's hard to even imagine how the past year and a half would have been different if you just weren't around. Honestly, it's like really difficult to imagine what that timeline, that world line would have been like. But I think you're so you're so principled. And principled, yes, in the moral, ethical way, but there's a different way of being principled, which is sort of being systems oriented,
Mm-hmm.
constantly asking this one little decision. The way, the term that we use, the design of this site, the name of this unit in the course, how is that going to cascade up and cascade down into the kind of people we attract, into their expectations, into their outcomes? I thought I was principled and systems driven. But
Hmm.
I actually find that I change my mind quite a bit and I'm kind of all over the place compared to you because you're so crystal clear on what you believe. But also I think just as importantly in that is willing to change it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's sometimes funny where you'll keep going principle, principle, principle. And right when it's really going to be a disaster, then suddenly it's like a 45-degree turn and you're still on a principle, but it's a different principle.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you sort of want to, you sort of use it as a forcing function. It's like you push that principle as far as it will go until it's really breaking down. And then suddenly you pivot in a new direction, which I really admire. And I think is a great way to run a business. It provides a way to adapt to change while still providing leadership,
Hmm.
I think is
It's
what it does.
interesting. I wonder how much of this came from my experience playing golf at a really high level. Because the thing with golf is, like, if you play soccer or basketball, you can only spend like 2 or 3 hours a day with a ball in your hands. But when you play golf, I used to go and I would arrive at the course at sunrise and I would leave at sunset because golf isn't like a physically taxing sport. And with that, it requires all that time, and also just the challenge of it requires such principles into how do I do things. There's routines. And so in order to try to compete at a high level, because I was less strong than most people and honestly wasn't quite as talented, I sort of outworked people. But I realized that it wasn't just in time, it was also in terms of strategy. And it's interesting because a lot of what I do with rite of passage, and just I never want a willingness to take action to be my barrier. Like, what I often find is that action, taking it first, will lead to the right strategy over time. That isn't to say that you just want to run around like a chicken with its head cut off, because that wouldn't be helpful either. But what I do find is that, especially online, when the costs of an error are mostly pretty low, by taking action, things begin to emerge. And I have a lot of faith that insights and ideas will emerge just through the process of taking action every day, of tweeting 5 times a day, of trying to write for 90 minutes a day, and then always trying to have these conversations. And I have a deep, almost religious faith in that.
Yeah, me too. Something I've noticed with my blog is it's sort of like an alternative history because on your blog, you can change anything. You can go back, change if you got the title wrong, change the title, change the URL, change the terms you use, change the links, change the footer, change the lead. Like you're constantly going back and editing what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it's kind of like I'm really fascinated these days by world building. I watched I watched The Mandalorian recently. Finally came back to the U.S. I didn't have Disney Plus in Mexico City, so I had to wait till I got back to the U.S. and watched this show, which as many people know, is made completely on a soundstage. Right? It's this epic Star Wars film, deserts and canyons and mountains and space. 100%. It's the first Disney live action film that's done completely on it's a 360-degree soundstage where they instead of green screen, which is so artificial to the actors, they project images. And they can do that because Star Wars has so much material. They just they have a world. They can just reach back and get an alien and a robot and a storyline and a Jedi mind trick. There's so much to work with, and that's how I feel with my blog. Is I have such a backlog to pull
Hmm.
from that I can then create my reality, and the world that I create is more convincing. It's more higher fidelity. Do you notice anything like that in your?
Yeah,
How
I
do you
mean,
think of your blog?
yeah. Well, I don't really edit my blog ever. And so it's funny. It's like almost having the option of that is the nice part. But then also I think of it a little bit differently in that the things that aren't popular just kind of get lost to obscurity, whereas the things that are popular just sort of jump up. So there is a kind of invisibility in obscurity. And I think that that's comforting. But what I love doing is coming up with a whole language for things like personal monopolies. Like you and I came up with that at a coffee shop called Tierra de Garat in Mexico City. And we would sit down every morning and remember we got the big whiteboard and we had the Sharpies and we would go walk from your place in Zona Roma and then we'd go to the other Airbnb that we were renting that doubled as the studio for that week. We'd sit down and we'd chat and basically I would just spew out all of these ideas and then you help me structure them, and then in the afternoon you would sit right under the camera and you would interview me and I would say these are my frameworks, but then the ideas begin to take a life of their own, and that's when this gets exciting, when other people begin to comment on and critique their personal monopolies, when people use your language as just how they actually construct an idea. And the way that I think about this, well, first, it's been very inspired by people like Ben Thompson and people like Tim Urban at Wait But Why. Ben Thompson has ideas like aggregation theory that he's always referring back to. And, the hyperlink was a very important invention in terms of what it means to write online, because what the hyperlink allowed you to do was obviously link to something so that you didn't always have to explain what you were focused on and you could just get right to the point. So what I think of writing online as, it's like you're crossing a river, and what you're trying to do by giving people terms is, like, the world is just so complicated and we're always trying to make sense of it. But when you give people a term, you give them a stone to walk across. And once you have enough stones, they're coherent and they're all part of a similar structure and a unified worldview. And each stone, from personal monopoly to differentiation is free marketing to the paradox of specificity, there's a whole, like, we're going to end up having a glossary of terms for rite of passage. And for me, language is the original world building. And over time, we'll get into design and some other things. And ultimately, I want rite of passage to evolve into the business school of the future. And language building is the first stone as we walk across that river.
So let's, if someone doesn't know what a personal monopoly is, can you talk about what that is and what that has to do with like what does writing and rite of passage, your course, have to do with personal monopolies?
Yeah, so the ultimate goal of writing online is to build a personal monopoly. And the idea is inspired by a guy named Jerry Garcia, the famous musician, who he said that you want to be the only person in the world who does what you do. But when you first hear that, it's really intimidating, very daunting. And you say, how is it that in a world with all of these people, how can I be the only person who does what I do? But what you realize is that, and this is one of the things that we talk a lot about in Rite of Passage, like, how do you find a personal monopoly, a kind of brand that is both specific enough for other people that they can then define what you do? Oh, Tiago is the building a second brain guy, but also limitless enough to you that you don't feel constrained. That's the great challenge. So people generally err on a personal monopoly by saying, this is going to be my personal monopoly in 5 years. I'm just going to do that. But what's really sort of counterintuitive about this, and it's one of the things I've learned from you and just the way that you trust your intuition, is writing is extremely hard. It's extremely taxing. It's actually agonizing to write consistently. And you can only write about things that you are genuinely passionate about. And I mean that in every sense of the word. The ideas that actually rile you up, To sit at your computer for 90 minutes, as I do every single day, you have to love an idea. And so I always encourage students to write about the thing that gets them amped to write about. And over time, a personal monopoly emerges in hindsight. So these are some of the ideas that we focus on in writing, in rite of passage. And the reason why writing allows you to do that is because writing is, first of all, a proof of work. Everybody knows that if you've written 5,000 words about something, you know a lot about that thing. Also, in order for yourself to realize what you want to do in life, if you talk to anyone who's under 30, they basically all say the same thing. I don't know what I want to do with my life, in a very mopey way. And as a society, we don't have a way to actually help people figure out what they want to do, where they're talented, what they know better than other people. Writing does that for you.
And what is driving, would you say, this interest in writing? Why are suddenly people so interested and passionate about discovering their personal monopoly, starting a blog, an email newsletter, all these things? What's driving that?
For the first time in human history, you can reach any person on planet Earth 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you can influence them by moving nothing but your fingertips, by sitting at your house, in your office, and sending off a message, an article, an essay onto the internet. And what begins to happen is you become a lighthouse for like-minded people, where traditionally we've said, what is networking? I am going to go to a conference. I am going to go to a bar or to a party and try to meet people. I'm going to go do the effort. Now, rather than going to other people, people come to you. So the challenge of writing online is to have a frequency, to use a radio metaphor, that is so unique and so specific that other people come to you. And what you realize is that gives you an incredible amount of leverage. No longer does knowledge have to be something that you deliver with your mouth, and every single time that you share it with somebody new, you need to go spend more time doing it. Now, you can publish something once and people can benefit from it forever. We're still reading Plato and Aristotle and Dostoevsky, all these people who wrote hundreds of years ago. And I think people intuitively realize that that is extremely valuable. Now, there's a couple other things. There is, first of all, the fact that people are seeing that many of the top writers, rather than being these starving artists, are now doing very well. And they are now working for high levels in companies. Writing is now leading to jobs. We're seeing people who are writing online, building audiences, and turning that right into businesses. This is what Nathan Barry did with ConvertKit. He built an email list that was really popular, published a couple ebooks, and now he has a software as a service company that does $20 million a year in subscription revenue. And people are realizing that in the same way that the office rewards people who talk well, remote work rewards people who write well. And so people are then seeing, wow, I never learned how to write in school because our writing teaching and education is so bad. And if I can learn to write with everything I just said, I will have a tremendous skill and leverage that I will use every single day for my career.
I think that's something that most people really don't see, is how pivotal writing is to their career. They think that's for someone else. That's for a New York Times journalist. That's for an investment banking blogger somewhere. But, something I notice often is when you conquer obviously difficult challenges, smaller things are just so easy, right? So, when I write an essay and I'm trying to figure out how to explain something in thousands of words, when I go to write an email, I can be so much more powerful and succinct. I have such a more expansive vocabulary and an understanding of human psychology and an understanding of how to have a hook and capture and grab people's attention and then lead them into a story. That email is just, it's like so easy and I can do it so much more effectively. I think people don't really understand how much variability there is in quality of writing, even in the most mundane
Mm,
things. The way you send text messages, the way you post on Facebook, the way you write memos to your company, emails to potential clients, to your boss. Like the variability I see is just vast. And you think, okay, well, how can you improve that? You can't really just write enough emails to improve your writing, right?
right.
It's kind of like weightlifting. You have to do something that's beyond your current capacity to then build that capability. And so I think it's kind of like the pool of people that can benefit from this really profoundly is so much bigger than they themselves realize,
Yep.
than they self-identify.
You get better at writing, not by writing, but by rewriting.
Say more.
That's when the improvement happens. When you begin to look at a sentence and the construction of it and edit it, and then look at how different sentences and ideas are pieced together. And that is when your writing improves. But rewriting is also rethinking. And what writing allows you to do is put the first draft of your ideas out on a page, realize that you're spending your entire life. Like when you look at a first draft of your writing, you're like, that's not very good. That thinking's not very clear. And you begin to realize that in life, that first draft of your writing is how you go around the world thinking. And it's a very humbling exercise. But then you realize that by making yourself smarter and having the pressure to write online, you are also attracting people, ideas, and opportunities, conference invites, speaking gigs, podcast opportunities, new people to go start businesses with, angel investment opportunities, all of that comes through writing. And it was only in the last 5 years that this really became possible, where the platforms became good enough and it became culturally acceptable enough to be writing online. And people are seeing that this is something that everyone should be doing. And it is the great equalizer for geography, for income. I mean, most of our students now are from places that aren't in North America. Yesterday, I was looking as we launched Rite of Passage, the first new people who signed up. We had 2 from Germany, 1 from India, 1 from Singapore. We had someone at one of our conferences from Somalia this week. This is a global craft.
Incredible. What are some of the results? Like, what do you see your students coming out of the course? What do they go on to do? What happens in their lives because of their writing?
Yeah, I think that there are 2 people who come to mind here. The first is a guy named Packy McCormick, and Packy has a newsletter now with 2,500 subscribers, but he is using his writing to raise investment for his new company, which is going to be a community starting in New York City, and people are going to come together, and it's called Not Boring. And it's sort of this social club, but for people who are really interested in ideas. You could think of Soho House meets the library, and writing is allowing him to think through how that company is going to work. And when he joined Rite of Passage, he was the VP of experiences at Breather. So Breather was a fast growing venture scale company, and he was on their executive team. So writing has helped him navigate this transition and meet investors. And then I also watched Ana Lorena Fabrega, who now has a summer camp, and I watched her in Rite of Passage skyrocket to thousands of email subscribers, almost 10,000 followers on Twitter, and to watch somebody who was disillusioned by the education system use Rite of Passage to explode her career. And I ended up saying, Anna, I'd love to work with you on building a summer camp. And so now we are working together and trying to see what we can do to invent education for kids.
Yeah, it's been amazing for me to see. I feel like Rite of Passage has really injected a lot of energy into my work and into the building a second brain sort of ecosystem, because it's the final stage. It's the delivery. right? Like in my courses, it's more internal facing. You're building your systems, your productivity, your knowledge management, note taking, your second brain, which is so fun and exciting. But I constantly go on and on about how if that's all it ever does, if it never actually reaches the outside world, then it's really just like an interesting game. It's just like a little it's not really producing knowledge or any impact on the outside world. And I think rite of passage has kind of demonstrated that you can get a note-taking system and your notes, which is all these little packets of knowledge that you've gathered and collected, and then bring those directly into a piece of writing that itself actually has an impact on your life. Like it's been the proof. It's produced the evidence that is possible. And so I think the sort of the back and forth dynamic between building a second brain and rite of passage has been really, really important for both of them.
Yeah, it's interesting because rite of passage itself came from about a 75-minute video that you recorded showing how you used your second brain to actually write. And it's built out of what is it? Principles of Product Development Flow. Is that the book that you love?
Yeah.
So it's built out of that book, which is this old manufacturing book that what I ended up doing because building a second brain was so transformative for me was I went back and I read the books that had influenced you the most, like The Goal, like Principles of Product Development Flow, Breaking Smart. I read them all. And then from that video, took the ideas that you had around intermediate packets and about what it means to create from abundance. And in rite of passage, we focus on how to write from abundance. So it's really cool to see how the second brain DNA is infused into rite of passage, as if what I had to do was take your language and your way of thinking and then translate it into a production oriented class.
We're always trying to decide which one people should take first. And I feel like the answer is it kind of depends on your learning style.
Mm-hmm.
Some people intuitively, naturally, they like to do all the preparation and do all their homework and get all their ducks in a row and then spring into action. And other people want to hack the system and take a bunch of shortcuts, jump the turnstile, see what's at the end, and then if they like it, go back and start at the beginning. And actually, I think both are fine. Both can work. In fact, whatever one people tend to be, I tend to advise them to try the opposite, to try to see what is a different way of approaching things. But I think you can really do either direction, but having both, the knowledge management system and then essentially the knowledge delivery system, which is writing and the blog and newsletters, is almost like a recipe for success in the modern world. I mean, even beyond business, it's just the way, like you often highlight, meeting people, making friends, connecting to communities, improving yourself. Business success or professional success almost just seems like, the cherry on top, icing on the cake kind of thing.
I have a question for you. What has been the most, like, as you think of your time writing online, what has been a story or a moment that made you say, wow, I'm so happy that I discovered this?
Writing, you mean?
Yeah, writing online. Moment of serendipity, something you couldn't have done otherwise.
Oh, I mean, everything I've done in the past 6 years. I mean, it's just, oh gosh, it would be much harder to answer the opposite question. What's something that would have been possible without writing? And I can't really think of much. I mean, it's like having, at this point, I think I have 300 posts, 300 autonomous agents out in the world, just like burrowing themselves into every little nook and cranny of the internet, people's inboxes and their read later apps and their notes and their conversations with their family and friends. I mean, it's like having 300 little minions. And I think one of the things that's most surprised me is you just have no idea what's going to do well, on what timeline it's going to do well. Sometimes a post from 3 years ago, it didn't do well because I was too ahead of my time, or at least that's what I tell myself. The timing wasn't right. And then a certain number of things change and happen, and suddenly the moment has arrived for that thing, and people start catching on to it and sharing it, and it pops. And it's like there's this sense of that I'm really not in control. It's really not all on my shoulders. My only responsibility is to get what I know out. And from that point on, it's the universe's responsibility. It's reality's job to find what is working and what is impactful and what is effective, and just reflect it back to me. I kind of feel like a low level worker in the giant factory that is my life. Like I don't have that much responsibility, which is nice.
Yeah, I think it's hard to appreciate how ideas just go to work for you once you start writing, and how somebody will share an essay from like 2 or 3 years ago, and it is like having all these minions who are just going out and crawling through the internet through hyperlinks and email newsletter recommendations, and then things just sort of happen. And that's why one of the key words in rite of passage is serendipity, because it is a word that implies exactly what this is. These magical accidents that you never expected and could have never predicted, that open doors that you didn't even know existed. And with that is what writing online creates. And what's so cool about this journey is that we don't need audiences like Oprah and Tim Ferriss and all of these huge names that I used to think, oh, only they had it. These benefits came to us back when we had 4, 5, 6 articles on our site, because just from that, it allows somebody to Google you and say, wow, this person has done a level of research and thinking into a really interesting topic that I've never done before. I was on a website the other day from somebody that I know, and I went on his personal website. It was 4 sentences, and all he did was talk about what he did, but he had really interesting hyperlinks. He linked back to Aristotle's Politics. He linked back to a David Foster Wallace essay, to an old essay that about Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger in the early days of their partnership. And you just look at this website and you're like, wow, this person is extremely interesting. And just that one thing is creating a whole level of serendipity and credibility for you that a LinkedIn profile can never communicate. And that is 1/100th of what we focus on in Rite of Passage.
Yeah. I remember when in my previous job at a consulting firm, I was responsible for hiring an employee. They were going to be a junior analyst, the lowest ranking person in that branch of our consulting firm in San Francisco. And even back then, this was 2012. Okay. We're talking 8 years ago. There were 2 piles for resumes. They weren't paper. They were mostly digital, but basically 2 piles. People with a website and people that didn't have a website.
Wow.
It was that clear. And maybe 10% at most had a website. Like just having the basic, this is who I am, this is a photo of me. Sometimes the website was nothing more than the resume in a website. That's all it was. But it showed initiative, diligence, attention to detail, motivation, agency, all these things that we wanted. And I imagine, I mean, we didn't really look for this back then, but there would be a third pile, which is people that not only have a website, they have a blog. They've actually synthesized their thinking into something, taken, really it's leadership. It's a form of leadership to stand ahead of the crowd, you know, in that endless line of people all being judged by the same criteria. They stepped forward and said, I want to be judged by the quality of my ideas. And these are my ideas. I really think increasingly every position in every company is going to have the equivalent of that.
You know, one of the things that drives my work is this interesting paradox where, on one hand, people don't believe that they have a way of thinking. They don't actually believe in their own ideas. They don't think that what's happening in their internal monologue is worth other people hearing. And it is. Not every idea, but the best ideas that you are thinking about, other people will benefit from. Patrick McKenzie at Stripe has this great line that you underestimate how many ideas are obvious to you that would be transformative to other people. and
Mm-hmm.
how much people would benefit from hearing those ideas.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, that people don't value the rigor of what's going on in their mind, they also have this loud screaming voice within them where they don't feel heard. They feel invisible, and that aches and it nags at them. And every day they are sitting on their couch, consuming, scrolling, and not actually creating anything. They're always the retweeters, never the tweeters. And what rite of passage allows people to do is to recognize which ones of their ideas are worth sharing, and then to also give people the strength and the courage to share their ideas online, because that's really hard for people. But you get to the end of the course and people say, wow, I'm really happy I did that.
Yeah, it's been amazing to see. Amazing to see the progress you've made, improving the course, improving the curriculum, really obsessively serving your students. It's really inspiring.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, you have a cohort kicking off soon, right? When does that start?
It starts July 1st. So the cart closes on June 29th, and we would love to see you. You'll find all of the details in the show notes below, and it is riteofpassage.school for the website. Thank you very much, Tiago.
Thanks, David.